Tell me when. Okay, so you're here for the Schiller Institute meeting, I assume. If you're not here for that, you can go on down the hall, I guess. But this is Saturday. This is the 13th of May, and this is Schiller Institute meeting here in Houston. I'm Brian Lantz, and we'll be covering really with a little bit of depth the Belt and Road Forum, because that's opening in approximately six hours, something like that, in Beijing. Leaders from at least 29 countries at last count, presidents and prime ministers, are there personally, and many other governments are sending high-level delegations. There's over 100 nations represented altogether. So, and this is going to be extremely fruitful and extremely important for the future of mankind. And so we're going to be discussing that. We're going to also discuss some of the principles in terms of Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws, as he calls them, in terms of organizing and economic recovery. If you haven't seen it yet, it's well worth producing from your computer the new pamphlet, America's Future on the New Silk Road, LaRouche's 4 Laws, the Physical Economic Principles for the Recovery of the United States. That's available on the LaRouche PAC website. But key off this, America's Future on the New Silk Road. So I'm going to start here with just a few opening remarks, and then we're going to watch a short video that's just been prepared by Jason Ross and friends, which is up, I think, on several websites now. But let me just start and kind of introduce it. The short video, it's a 7-minute video, is on the importance of the Belt and Road Forum and what's unfolding for the world there. There is nothing more beautiful in the universe than the human species. By the creative power of the mind, we are able to understand less and less imperfectly how the universe is composed and our relation to it and to each other. This ability should serve as the foundation of our self-identity, for our education, and for our culture. That's the concluding section from the pamphlet I was just referring to on creating a future in terms of the arts and sciences, a revival of creating a renaissance in the arts and sciences. But that's a lot. That's a lot right there. That's a tremendous amount, which if you found yourself hesitating and just taking in that first sentence, there is nothing more beautiful in the universe than the human species, then you're already a victim of Bertrand Russell and John Dewey, and you're a victim. You yourself are entrapped in an outlook which right now is a good time, to get over. I mean, maybe you should think of it like a cigarette addiction or something. This is now a good time to kick the habit. Yes, exactly. Because it does not correspond with the universe and man's role in the universe. This is as old as the old book, the Old Testament of the Bible, much less the New Testament, in terms of man being made in the image of God. But let me use another example here because of what we're going to be discussing today. Let me quote Zhu Xi, the Confucian philosopher of China. He was an important figure, very important figure in the revival and development of Confucian thought. He lived in 1130 to 1200 AD. Confucius had lived at the time of Socrates and Plato, 500, 400 BC. see. But this is from The Great Learning, and you'll find out where I'm going with this in a minute. But this is a quote from his Book of Rites. The ancients, this is Zhu Xi speaking, in translation, of course. The ancients, wishing that all men under heaven keep their inborn luminous virtue unobscured, first had to govern the nation well. Wishing to govern the nation well, they first established harmony in their household. Wishing to establish harmony within their households, they first cultivated themselves. Wishing to cultivate themselves, they first set their minds in the right. Wishing to set their minds in the right, they first developed sincerity of thought. Wishing to have sincerity of thought, they first extended their knowledge to the utmost. The apprehension of knowledge to the utmost lies in the fully apprehending the principle of things. And I'll just underscore that first to the first a semicolon here is translated. The ancients, wishing that all men under heaven keep their inborn luminous virtue unobscured, first had to govern the nation well. And for the sake of, I referenced the Bible in terms of man being born in the image of God, which is a viewpoint shared by Judaism and Islam. We find it as well here in Confucius, right? Zhu Xi attributes to every individual the inborn luminous virtue as a characteristic of mankind, not some, but of all. Zhu Xi is not unimportant to what is going on in China today, and that's part of the reason I'm bringing it up, because I was speaking yesterday to a group of property rights advocates here in Houston, and the question of, well, what is the intention, of China? They were really quite taken, flabbergasted, just really surprised, some excited about the potential of the new Belt and Road, the Belt and Road Forum that's beginning in just a matter of hours in Beijing. The new Silk Road, as it's often referred to. But again, this question of, well, what is their intention? Or as a student put it to us at our forum back a few months ago at Texas Southern University, what does China get out of this? If they're building all this stuff for everybody else, what do they get out of it? Yeah, what's really going on here? Which is a good question. I mean, it's a good question. And so this is part of what I'm thinking about in terms of what I'm trying to present here very briefly. And in that regard, I want to bring us forward to Sun Yat-sen at the beginning of the 20th century, who is the recognized founder of modern China. Whether you're an exponent of Taiwanese national thought, or you're an exponent of mainland Chinese thought, Sun Yat-sen is regarded, by all as the founder of modern China. And he took up. He was trained in Hawaii. He was raised and grew up as a Christian. He was a Christian. He was also an exponent of Confucianism because he saw the actual outlook as absolutely compatible, as I'm just kind of briefly presenting here. And he was also trained by those who were themselves collaborators of Henry Carey, who was the economic advisor to President Abraham Lincoln. And is well known to those who are serious about the history of American political economy and American economic thought. Henry Carey is a towering giant. These circles are the circles that trained Sun Yat-sen. So he emphasized that and think about this from the standpoint of today. Well, what does China get out of this? What is the thinking now in China in terms of its roots, deep roots in thinking? Sun Yat-sen stated, this was in the International Development of China, which he published in 1919. He stated, this is very brief, the primary force of human evolution is cooperation and not struggle, as that of the animal world. Let me just repeat that. I kind of stated it poorly. The primary force of human evolution is cooperation and not struggle, as that of the animal world. Now think of that again, that's a lot. You think of how most people approach, just how they judge, the character of their neighbor, or the guy walking towards them on the sidewalk, or they pick up the newspaper and they wonder about what's going on in the Texas state legislature, or any number of examples. It's all approached, not obviously from this standpoint. Sun Yat-sen specifically called for the revival of the Book of Rights, that is of Zhu Xi, alongside the principles of Hamiltonian economics, Alexander Hamilton's economics, and the thinking of Abraham Lincoln. You may know that his three principles are one, national sovereignty of the people, republican government by the people, and the general welfare for the people. So it was alongside this that he stressed, quote, we must revive not only our old morality, this is in response to the decay and destruction of British colonial rule, the spread of opium, the corruption in terms of, the imposition of a British brutal Hobbesian outlook on China. He said we must revive not only our old morality, but also our old learning, the great learning. Another book by Zhu Xi. Search into the nature of things, extend the boundaries of knowledge. He's quoting Zhu Xi here. Make the purpose sincere, regulate the mind, cultivate personal virtue, rule the family, govern the state, pacify the world. And continuing, then this is now Sun Yat-sen remarking on that quote. He said, this is Sun Yat-sen, let us pledge ourselves to lift up the fallen and to aid the weak. Then when we become strong and look back upon our own sufferings, once we've lifted ourselves up, under the political and economic domination of the powers that we suffered under, and see weaker and smaller peoples undergoing similar treatment, we will rise and smite that imperialism. Then will we be truly governing the state and pacifying the world. So you can if you take that as kind of a starting point, I think you really have a window on the Belt and Road Forum, the Belt and Road process, that has been launched, particularly by China, but in collaboration with, I think it's now 60 countries are now direct collaborators with the Belt and Road Initiative. And just for those, we're going to go through it in a minute, but for those who aren't aware, this is already 12 times, some have said 20 times, as large as the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II to rebuild Europe. So this is enormous in terms of ports, energy, rail, fiber optic capability or connectivity, satellite utilization, many dimensions, educational and cultural. So let's go to this 7-minute video that Jason prepared, and it's a great, wonderful summary. And then we'll come back and we'll develop the latest developments as we're going into the Belt and Road Forum.
It would be the biggest mistake ever if the U.S. didn't take advantage of the Belt and Road Forum that's taking place in a week in Beijing, China. The biggest mistake ever. This event is going to bring together representatives of over 100 nations on this planet, including the direct participation of almost 30 heads of state. And they're going to discuss the greatest project of our generation, the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, so far, there's no indication or announcement that President Trump or other U.S. representatives will attend. But
if we can convince President Trump to take up the offer to join with China and the other nations in the new Silk Road, he can become one of the greatest presidents of the history of the United States.
This initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, was launched officially by China in 2013. It's a program of mutually beneficial connectivity, of infrastructure, of common development programs. So far, the proposals and works in progress embrace over 60 nations, affecting over 4 billion people, the majority of humanity, with plans for $20 trillion in infrastructure spending. That's 2 or 3 times what would be needed to fully revitalize U.S. infrastructure. It's 20 times the $1 trillion that Trump has called for so far. This is a huge project. These programs, they've got the potential to eliminate poverty on the globe within a generation, completely and totally eliminate endemic poverty everywhere. Already, over the past few decades, China has seen phenomenal development.
And China really began to feel its oats about that time. And rightfully, they have achieved a lot. They moved 500 million Chinese people out of poverty into middle-class status.
Okay, which is a great thing, great thing. And I met with the president of China at great length in Florida, and we had long, long talks, hours and hours and hours. He's a good man.
China is springing ahead with its own development and working together with its neighbors. Through Chinese investment by the nation, by corporations, and through new financing from institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the New Development Bank, and the Silk Road Fund, these are mechanisms created since 2013, major projects of enormous scope are made possible.
This is a historic project, as you all know. It is probably the biggest global achievement, which is analogous to reaching out into space and to the moon and to other planets. It's probably the most comprehensive initiative that many nations will be working together on.
So let's take a tour. Starting in Asia, there are 6 development corridors proposed by China for road, rail, water, electricity, communications, along with soft infrastructure, such as education, customs standardization, cultural exchange. These corridors are currently underway to varying degrees. Take, as an example, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It's currently under massive construction. It's going to bring 10 gigawatts of electricity to Pakistan. That's enough for millions of people, 10 million people or more. A new port at Gwadar, hundreds of thousands of jobs along the way, just in that construction, and more foreign investment overall into Pakistan than that nation has received in the past couple of decades cumulatively. Consider the ocean. The 21st century maritime Silk Road, including cutting a canal through the Isthmus of Kra in Thailand. This is a huge and necessary project to relieve the overcrowding through the Straits of Malacca and to bring economic opportunity to Thailand and Southeast Asia more generally. This idea, proposed for decades, has real potential to be built within this decade. Reaching to Europe, the Eurasian land bridge carries increasing amounts of rail cargo, with rail departures of freight trains headed west to Europe daily. returning to China with European goods. If we look to Africa, we see the recent opening of the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railroad as just one example of the much-needed development now possible, now happening in Africa, where investment in infrastructure and industry and agriculture are reaching new highs, most of it from China. Moving east, we cross the Bering Strait. We go from Asia into North America, from Russia to Alaska. A land route made possible by this connection will be faster than ship transport, and it allows the region along the way to be developed. The Arctic has immense resources that are currently almost completely inaccessible. Building the necessary infrastructure and the Bering Strait crossing itself will be a major infrastructure achievement. Then, a rebuilt US infrastructure foundation, a network of railways, of roadways, a platform of new high-density power plants, nuclear power, ports, locks, dams, schools, other public buildings, other public works will allow the US to reach a new level of productivity and to have more to contribute to and benefit from the world community. As we move south, there is currently no land transportation from North to South America. You can't drive to South America, not possible. There's a break known as the Darien Gap. Finally getting the construction done and linking this short section of only a few dozen miles will finally connect the Americas as a whole. Also in Central America, new financing, primarily from China, is already making possible a second canal, a second Panama Canal, you might say, with construction and site prep underway currently in Nicaragua. In South America, in the planning stages is the construction of a bi-oceanic corridor, stretching from Peru to Brazil, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, by way of Bolivia. So much of the world is currently working together for aims of common development and a shared future of advancement, of dignity, and of scientific achievement. Will the US join in? We are invited with open arms.
Last but not the least, I want to quote President Xi as saying that China welcomes the United States to participate in cooperation within the Belt and Road framework. Both countries should really seize the opportunities.
Let's accept this invitation. The US of 100 years from now, looking back, will be so glad that we did.
Absolutely. So just picking up from where Jason left off, meaning what's happened just in the course of the last few days, the U.S. has, the President Trump and his administration has made the decision. They're sending, and have sent by now, you'd have to say a high-level, relatively high-level delegation to the Belt and Road Forum, opening in a matter of hours. It's going to be headed by, or is headed by, Matthew Pottinger, who's the National Security Council Senior Director on East Asia. He's been named Special Assistant to President Donald Trump for his visit to observe the summit. Pottinger is a Marine officer who served under General Michael Flynn in Afghanistan and was appointed to the National Security Council by Michael Flynn. He speaks fluent Mandarin Chinese, and he was active in managing the Mar-a-Lago summit between President Trump and President Xi of China a matter of weeks ago. So he's heading the delegation, and I'm not going to go through it, but it's easy to find on YouTube. Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, was shall we say, quizzed on why the U.S. would be interested in doing something, on the other side of the globe, and sending a delegation. Like Syria. Yeah, right, like Syria, right. But he was Spicer was very straightforward in indicating the relationship. This is something very much in the interests of the United States. It's going to be shaping a great deal of the world. It's a major initiative by China, and therefore, and it's a complement to the transformed relationships between the United States and China already. So this is so the U.S. has stepped forward. A lot more. I mean, already at the summit itself, President Xi Jinping of China has met with President Orban of Hungary with new agreements there. The President of Switzerland, they're upgrading their relationship. President Sharif of Pakistan. There's also indications of improving work urged on by China between Pakistan and India as something that could be developing in the near future. We have the President of the Czech Republic, Milo Zeman. They're reaching agreement during the Belt and Road Summit on the first comprehensive strategic partnership. The first in the sense that it's the first of a European Union member with China, although other countries, including Denmark and Greece, have important official relationships and developing long-term economic relationships. Nonetheless, the Czech Republic's role now folds in, along with other Central European countries that are well represented at the summit. Siberia, I mentioned Hungary, so on and so forth. I mentioned the U.S. participation. Denmark upgraded its delegation to the forum. Trilateral meetings are occurring, Turkey, Russia, and China. Besides bilateral meetings of China with Russia and China with Turkey, there's a three-way meeting between the three of them, and this, of course, is just intriguing. In other words, there's more going on than simply a bunch of people coming and sitting down in a big hall and hearing some speeches and then having some luncheons together, and we all pat each other on the back and everyone goes home. This is a consolidation of what Jason was just going through, right? We already have something close to $2 trillion has already been spent on the extended Belt and Road process from China, from these various financial institutions. Already has built out railroad projects in Africa, has already built out port facilities in South Asia, and so on and so forth. So there's a consolidation here in terms of, okay, well, here's what we've done. Now, what is the way forward? What are we going to be doing now? China and Russia are signing a major deal for the Primary, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing Primary or Primary 1 International Transport Corridor, which is from China, from northern China, up towards Vladivostok.
Can you point to that?
To this map? China up to, let's see, I'm looking.
Is it on the east? Is it on the east? Vladivostok?
Yeah, Vladivostok.
Oh, yeah, here,
right there.
Here, right there. Yep. From northern China to Vladivostok.
Great.
And linking into the Trans-Siberian Railway as well. Quote, let's see. I'm looking at see if there's a relevant quote that I have here. I'm just going to skip it. But there's also Primary 2. The whole idea is to open up this northern or eastern Russia, what many people refer to as Siberia, for development. Jason referred to it in terms of the enormous resources of the area. And of course, then that begs the connection across the Bering Strait to the New World. So agreements are going to be signed there between China and Russia at the conference. Italy's ambassador to China, Gentilini, the president of Italy, is attending, as well as the prime minister at last report. But Italy's ambassador to China, Intori Francisco Sequi, stated that the new Silk Road is offering a solution to the problems created by globalization. And it's doing so by investing in regions with chronic underinvestment in infrastructure like Central Asia. Just to indicate that what this project is doing is known to those who want to know it around the world. Now, I wanted to just step back for a second here. I have a little bit more to go through in terms of Japan and Korea, but and their role in the Belt and Road Forum that's opening up. But I wanted to refer to the third section of the pamphlet I just held up a minute ago, America's Future on the New Silk Road. The third section is on credit for increased productivity. And this is something that came up again yesterday, and I think it's something that's there in the back of people's minds. If not formulated, it's there as a kind of hole in their thinking. People don't necessarily know what they don't know, right? But then when it's raised, then they don't know what the answer is. One way it comes up is the idea of transportation. Again, the Belt and Road is not about just belts. It's not just about high-speed rail. It's not just, but nonetheless, this idea is that somehow, well, this is all about just getting from point A to point B. Well, we already get from point A to point B. We have the internet. We have all of these advanced, ways. We have highways. We have these kind of things, roads. Why do we need high-speed rail? I mean, why spend billions of dollars or even trillions of dollars on high-speed rail? Well, why did we build railroads in the first place? I mean, I don't know why. I mean, we could have gotten by on donkeys. I mean, that's one kind of answer, but more profoundly, as it's developed in the pamphlet, very briefly, but developed very succinctly, utilizing a couple of quotes from LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche. And again, you have to appreciate his economic writings and work over decades to really understand why he's so important here in this process, including important across Europe and Eurasia in terms of his thinking and his methodology. But a common misconception, well, let me just quote him here. Ordinarily, this is quoting from Mr. LaRouche, ordinarily the idea of productive, quote unquote productive, is associated with the output of labor by production. That is an honest mistake in judgment. The fact of the matter is that the precondition for the rise of cultures to revolutionary changes, to higher qualities of regions of sustainable potential relative population density, depends on virtual leaps in potential relative population density, which in turn require a higher quality of physical cultural platform within which to operate. In other words, the level of achievable productivity depends upon raising the platform through revolutions in infrastructure. In other words, the issue, okay, how do we create a renaissance? Well, there's many dimensions to it. We have this coming Tuesday, we have our dialogue of musical cultures that's being sponsored by Tracy G. Community Center in the evening. And, musicians, friends are joining us from the Chinese American community, Indian American community, Spanish American community, and so forth, Mexican American community, to present, highlights of classical and traditional music, that are part of the culture, the high points of their respective cultures, or at least reflect that. So obviously one way is to again present these to make current, to put into circulation, this beauty, right? To make beauty accessible to people again, to enable them to find in themselves that capability, right? If you can comprehend beauty, well, then that's in you. So the same is probably likewise in other people, right? So so there's a new basis for dialogue, for discussion. There's a new basis. But LaRouche's point here is to emphasize that you build a platform of infrastructure, not building a railroad from point A to point B or something, but the intention, what's required now, is to build out an entirely new platform, which raises, by its effect, the productivity and culture of the entire population. It makes possible a new relative potential population density, for across the entire society or societies. And that's not new. Think back to it. He states, this is a related quote, we should then recognize that the development of basic economic infrastructure had always been a needed creation of what is required as a habitable development of a synthetic rather than a presumably natural environment for the enhancement or even the possibility of human life and practice at some time in the existence of our human species. We've always required man being in the likeness of the Creator, in whatever religious form you want to comprehend that concept, is expressed by man's creation of artificial environments. But it's not that we come to nature and we fit in. I mean, fire, in the sense of building fires and roasting chickens or something, or woolly mammoths, is not, it's not there in nature. The birds and the bees or whatever don't do that, okay? So man from the very beginning begins to build out platform and then make revolutions ever more self-consciously in those platforms to advance the conditions of existence for mankind. So if you think, for example, of the idea of building a national high-speed rail system in the United States, you're talking about transforming the skill levels, educational levels of your entire population to do it. And then having done it or being in the process of doing it, what new possibilities are opened up? And of course, this shouldn't be new to us, at least for many of us. We can reflect back on the space program, at least from our youth, and understand how that transformed the United States, directly and indirectly. But this is also what China and the collaborative nations are doing right now, is they're not building out a set of projects as individual projects willy-nilly. They're attempting to build out in a coordinated fashion, right? Mutual benefit, mutual consultation, these are terms that are used, right? To build out a new platform which raises the productivity of a population, which unlike the West, you have a population that 65% of it is under the age of 25. Right? You're talking about unleashing an enormous new productive capacity for mankind, for all of mankind. So I think, if you think about it from that standpoint, in terms of what you're doing, in terms of transforming the inner life of every citizen, in the process of a transformative approach to infrastructure, then you begin to grasp both what is going on with the Belt and Road Forum, but also what we have to think of here. In other words, a $1 trillion infrastructure program. Jason referred to it briefly. I mean, that's what Trump proposed during the campaign period, and specifically. A $1 trillion bank or infrastructure fund or whatever for, that's, after 50 years of decay, what's required in the United States it's not measurable in terms of the number of potholes we have to fill or bridges we have to replace. Even the Society of Civil Engineers says that would cost $5 or $6 trillion, by the way. So a trillion one, yeah, I mean, that was their latest report. Their report card they put out every 5 years. I mean, a trillion is a drop in the bucket. It's sad to say, but it's a drop in the bucket. That you're talking in terms of at least what some of the Chinese representatives, like the Chinese Investment Corporation, the CIC, said. One of their spokesmen said, "Well, looking at the United States, you're talking about 6-8 trillion. That's really what the United States needs." Well, really, thinking it through, that's even an understatement, because we require energy, nuclear power plants. You don't build high-speed rail. You're talking about an electrified system. You have to have nuclear power plants to provide the quantities of electricity at reasonable prices, efficiently, day and night, 24/7. Right? You can't run it on windmills or solar. You're going to have an entire new power plant integrated system and power grids to go with this, because that's antiquated in most parts of the country. And there's many other features of it. So you're talking about tens of trillions of dollars in terms of building out an entirely new platform, raising the platform, right? Raising the bar in terms of a new platform, from which then, right, our children and grandchildren, really, and great-grandchildren will then, be in a position to advance from, right, to springboard from, culturally, scientifically, and otherwise. So I wanted to raise that. That may raise more questions than it answers, but I wanted to fold that in as part of, I think, a really important aspect of this whole discussion. Diane?
Yeah, I think it's also relative, this $1 trillion business, because if we throw in Hamiltonian banking, you're going to wipe out a lot of worthless value and bring it back to reason. Sure,
yes, Glass-Steagall, and bank reorganization, and writing off a lot of paper. Yeah, we can. Obviously, that's an impact. It's so far gone from our experience, but it used to be prices actually came down. With the advancing of science and technology, things ended up costing less. Better quality, and things replaced other things at cheaper prices, or the quality of what was provided. For example, transportation. I mean, the Model T Ford, and so forth, replacing the horse and buggy. I mean, you're talking about modes of transportation. One cost more, well, at least arguably, the Model T cost more, at least up front, than maintaining a horse and buggy. But what did it open up in terms of characteristics, in terms of transportation, in terms of range of transport, and so forth? I mean, it opened up an entirely new. It was part of an entirely new platform for the United States. So we could bring down from trillions or whatever. We could bring that down at least some. So let me speak just briefly. I think it's important to also just fold in here Japan and the Koreas. The South China Morning Post the other day, actually it's today's date, U.S., Japan, and Koreas make Belt and Road Forum a global affair. That this is really rounding out the picture. Now think of the note that it says Koreas. It's both North and South Korea are coming to the Belt and Road Forum. Now, we heard this afternoon that the U.S. Embassy in Beijing had sent a note to the government, the Chinese government, that they did not appreciate the North Koreans being, quote unquote, invited to the Belt and Road Forum. And the succinct response by the Chinese government was something to the effect of we're holding an inclusive an event here in Beijing. All are welcome. But again, remember the new U.S. ambassador who's been named, who has been the governor of Iowa. He's not yet in Beijing. You're dealing with the old Obama holdovers. Trying to stick, putting the stick into the spokes of the bicycle, so to speak. Trying to jam things up. So I think that's important. More importantly, in terms of both Koreas being there, is this is the outcome of the Trump-Xi collaboration, along with Japan and Russia as other parties to this, in terms of working now to cool out this mess that was created on the Korean Peninsula by the neocons in the Obama administration. And Obama is a neocon. I mean, that's something that hasn't dawned on a number of people, snowflakes and others. But but this is, but it's true, and everything was done by the Obama administration to with the Asia pivot, so-called, to set the U.S. into conflict with China over the South China Sea and likewise on the Korean Peninsula. So now you have a process moving forward. And let me just say, if you haven't heard it, just in the last 48 hours or so, it's become public. Well, some of this was known a week ago, but North Korea has been meeting, this is what's called Track 2. Track 2 meetings have been going on between U.S. representatives, private, professional, but not officially government representatives, have been meeting in Oslo, Norway, with North Korean representatives. The North Korean representatives includes the Director General of the North America Bureau of the Foreign Ministry. In other words, the people that are the so-called experts on U.S. North American affairs, and also with I believe it's the ambassador, the North Korean ambassador to the United Nations, if I remember that correctly. I don't have it here. Deputy ambassador to the United Nations, Jang E-hoon. So those talks have been ongoing. What was then stated by the Director General of the North American Bureau as they were returning from Oslo, Norway via Beijing at the airport was that Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, Pyongyang is open to talks, direct talks with Washington under the right conditions. So this is all unfolding. This is a process. If you remember, there was a similar process that occurred. It was part of a collaboration initially with South Korea. It was called the Sunshine Policy for South Korea, in which the United States, Jimmy Carter, others were in North Korea. They were in negotiations. They were, carrying the message. They were bringing back messages. It was all part of a negotiation process that moved things to the point of the wall began coming down between North and South Korea. Railroad connections were being made. There was industrial investment into the North, and so on. That was scuttled by Cheney and Bush in the post 9/11 era. Suddenly, we didn't want to deal with dictators. So now we're back on the track of attempting to cool these things out. So both Koreas are at the Belt and Road Forum, and Japan is sending a very high-level delegation led by the head of the party, the ruling party in Japan. And it's noted that it is by the Japanese press that it's a very high-level delegation. And the head of the party will be delivering a personal letter from Prime Minister Abe to President Xi, and so on. So this process is going forward. Let me I don't think, given what Jason presented, I don't think it's necessary, unless it comes up in the form of discussion, to really go through a lot of the projects that are named. Could you put up on that the slide there that we have on the Belt and Road for people to look at? Jason, I'll just make a few comments here on this. This again is from the U.S.'s Future on the New Silk Road pamphlet that we've just put out. You see here A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A is the these are all aspects of the Belt and Road Initiative so far. And all of this is open-ended. South America, for example, is not even here on the map. And of course, our idea is as well as to turn this into the World Land Bridge, not simply a Eurasian and Eurasian African land bridge process. But China is already very serious and very open about their collaboration with the Caribbean nations, South American nations, in terms of and seeing that as part of this of their expanded Belt and Road Initiative. But here, taking these into account, I'll just go through them and make a few comments. The China-Mongolia-Russia corridor is A, and that's also, that intersects what I was just mentioning a little bit earlier in terms of these new railroad projects. The first one, which is now has the green light, an agreement between Russia and China to move upward to Vladivostok and then upward northward, and in terms of opening up the resources of East Russia, Siberia, and so forth. The initial agreements on this were reached in June 2016. Skipping over to B, this is the Pakistan, that north-south route. That's the Pakistan-China or China-Pakistan Economic Development Corridor. This is highway, railroad, oil, natural gas, fiber optic connectivity. It's all of that. And to guard it, the Pakistani army has been expanded, and a specific force of over 50,000 men has been assigned specifically to this project. As Jason mentioned, it's well underway. This is approximately a $45 billion project that connects China's western part of China, all the way south to the port of Gwadar, which already exists but is being massively expanded in southwest Pakistan. They're facing out into the Indian Ocean. Or is that the Indian Ocean on the? Yeah. Yeah, that's the Indian Ocean. Then C, I'm just taking them in alphabetical order. There you have the new Eurasian land bridge. And most... Sorry.
Yeah, it's hard to see from here.
Oh, you can't see it from there?
Point to the route when you refer to it.
Okay, well, yeah, up here.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, space.
Okay, all right. All right. Now that's, this was the Eurasian land bridge that was proposed by Helga and LaRouche, which has been built out. There's now at least 39 separate routes over the Eurasian land bridge. This is the time for travel from cities in China to Europe is 2 to 3 weeks, depending, because you're still having to go through a number of changes in rail gauge. You have all kinds of, you have customs, various countries. This is not exactly clean as a whistle, but it's 2 or 3 weeks. That compares to 5 weeks by ocean. So you're already cutting the time, by more than a third, close to a half. And that's something that further advances are being made on. China, I believe Russia as well, but just recently it was noted the Chinese corporation that's the largest in the construction of railroad cars and railroad engines and so forth, announced that they're now developing a high-speed locomotive rail car system that can change gauges as it goes. Now I don't know how much they have to slow down to make those changes, but again, this is one way to skin the cat, as the old saying goes. Excuse me, Marcia. The other thing was, everyone's got to change to the same gauge. And of course, this goes way back. Talk about geopolitics, right? Countries didn't build to the same gauge because they didn't want the enemy to be able to use the railroad to come into their country. So, for invading armies. So they have different gauges, right? So to have to shift everything over. You can imagine the cost of this. Now, if you're building entire new rail systems, I mean, that's, you know, you can do that, right? And in terms of high-speed rail, you really have to redo an entirely new system of trackage, and not just the tracks themselves, but the ballast, the support, the, you know, everything there's different requirements. It's quite involved. Not that I'm an expert, but I mean, from what I've seen and what's been presented, it's there's a lot to it in terms of engineering and so forth. But the Eurasian Land Bridge, this is already a major development. And these railroad cars are leaving every day from China and vice versa from Europe going back. So this is ongoing. This exists. Then D, down here in Southeast Asia, from China down into Southeast Asia. Now you have there's dam projects in the works and so forth. That's remember the Mekong River and so forth. These rivers have different names in China, but these rivers have never been developed, you know, for hydroelectric capacity and simply for the control of the runoff from the monsoon seasons. So that's one feature of what's going forward. But also in terms of the China-Indochina corridor, as they refer to it, you have the Nanning to Hanoi rail line. You have also Cambodia's economic development zone. You have 9 cross-national highways. Again, these countries have never been connected before, you know, outside of trails. I mean, it's equivalent of dirt roads maybe in some cases, but nothing. You have the China-Laos River Railroad project. Further south, I mean, in Indonesia, down the southern tip there, you have the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail between two major cities in Indonesia. That's now underway. That's signed, sealed, and delivered. That's being built out. So that's Southeast Asia. That is now becoming a major area of development, and it links China with all of these countries and vice versa. So in terms of, again, thinking in terms of what you're doing to transform the skill levels, cultural levels of the population of the entire region, which is still, you know, it really is to a significant degree still operating under the conditions of the Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam War period of the 60s. This is the first transformation of that entire region, really since colonialism. E is the Bangladesh, China, Indian, Myanmar Development Corridor. And that's because Bangladesh sits between 2 parts of India. If you may not recall that, but India is kind of separated into two pieces there, right about where the E is on that map. So the railroad connections, road connections, and so forth, this has been slow to get going because a major stumbling block has been India-China relations in particular. And those are slowly being resolved. They're not completely resolved. Because the British, India is a British Commonwealth nation. Geopolitics is deeply ingrained. And we had a presentation by the UN consular from Bangladesh at our New York conference. It would be worth going back and reviewing it to get their viewpoint. But they're seeing themselves, placed between the ASEAN nations of Southeast Asia on their east, India on their west, China to the north. They're looking at that now as an advantage. They're in the crossroads, right? In other words, you got to go through us to get to the other side, right? Yes, right. So connectivity has a real specific meaning for them. They're in the middle of all these connections. But all of these countries, Bangladesh, India, Burma, Myanmar, Thailand, on up to China, all of these countries will now be are in the process. This will be a longer process than the China-Pakistan Economic Development Corridor, are all being linked. And then there's pipeline projects, highway, and other projects that are also involved. So, so this is going to be extremely important. So that's just a little bit on that. I mean, this is 440 million people is encompassed in that area. And again, that's a population in which 65%, maybe more, of the population is under the age of 25. This is just enormous potential. They're going to have an entirely different future ahead. And then F, you have the Maritime Silk Road, which is, of course, taking its name off of the old China expeditions and so forth that reached as far as Africa and throughout the Pacific Islands and so forth. Now that reaches, I think one thing that we kind of often have kind of missed in that is that, not that we haven't talked about it otherwise, but the Maritime Silk Road is what, so far at least, is what really connects to Ethiopia and Kenya and the projects on the east coast of Africa. Now across, we'll get to it in a second, G, the China Central West Asia Development Corridor. There you begin to develop it coming down from Egypt into Africa, right, on land. But just taking a look at the Maritime Corridor, of course, this is where you have the development of the Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway, which is now up and running, as you know. It employed 25,000 Ethiopians and Djiboutis in the construction of the 470-mile route from Djibouti, which is the major port, to the landlocked country of Ethiopia, to its capital, Addis Ababa. And now Chinese are training Ethiopians to take over the course of about 5 years the maintenance and running of the railroad entirely. You also have now the Kenya Standard Gauge Railway that's now under development. Their last railroad was built in 1899. And so this will reach from Kenya's Mombasa port all the way to the Ugandan border, and will do so in 1/10 of the time that it now takes to move anything that distance by road transport, which is all that really exists. Now this Central Asia, West Asia project, G there, Mike, if you can, no, just use your pointer just to point to it. Wake up there. I'm trying to keep this live. Reaches from West China through Central Asia, right? As you know, this is Uzbekistan. This is the Stan countries. You know, they've already completed the China Railway Development Group Corporation has already completed the longest tunnel in Central Asia. This is in Uzbekistan. Again, you're talking, you know, this is related to the Himalayas. I mean, this is
the tunnel is going through what?
From China into Uzbekistan.
Wow.
So anyway, so onward west, right? And you can see it comes out basically near Constantinople. But again, this is the route which otherwise it's not here on this map per se. But this is the other route swinging south that can sweep through the Middle East or West Asia, as otherwise known, and into North Africa. This can be the Silk Road. This is the old Silk Road, and can become the new Silk Road, literally, in the sense of the rebuilding of Syria and beyond. So these are the major corridors of the new Silk Road and the Belt and Road Initiative. Briefly, with just a few highlights, you know, Afghanistan is getting its first rail connections, literally. You know, Iran, in conjunction with India, you know, is is developing a new port, and that port running north is also going to run into Afghanistan, as well as run north along the Caspian Sea into Central Europe and Russia. So there's more than what's pictured here on this schematic. So that's highlights on that. There's other subjects that could be discussed. There's the FBI brouhaha, which is more than a brouhaha. The question now is who's going to replace James Comey, who's been dumped, rightfully so. The swamp is being drained in Washington, even if unevenly. There's people have heard about the, I was mentioning it earlier this morning, the ransomware hack. That's what you get in the, you know, if you look at the major press, it's headline news, the ransomware hack attack. Let me just say on that Bill Binney, the man who built or designed the NSA system globally, and because of Edward Snowden's release of documents, can now talk about what he built. Bill Binney's a whistleblower himself, but he can now talk more forthrightly since the system he built is now public. But he emphasized that, look, the NSA, the CIA, and so forth, they design their systems to have backdoors, to have weaknesses, and so forth. And that's what's exploited. You know, that's exploited by them, and it's exploited by others. So his suggestion was that President Trump direct, you know, immediately the NSA, CIA, and so forth to close all their vulnerabilities. And then we might begin, perhaps, to get some cybersecurity. But this is the, you know, rather than all the mumbo jumbo about Russian hackers or, you know, whatever that's out there floating around, that, you know, this should be dealt with forthrightly, as he as an expert is indicating, for starters. Anyway, just to say that because I know that's out there, and for our audience that's watching this at home or from work or whatever, you should know that there's an answer to some of this, and you can, you know, you can Google Bill Binney or something. I'm sure you'll come up with an article about what he has to say about this. On the Comey business, let me first of all just briefly urge people to go to the LaRouchePAC.com and look up the interview. You could Google it also on YouTube. I imagine you can just put in YouTube Richard Black and come up with a state senator of Virginia, Richard Black. He does an extensive interview with us. It's about a 40-minute interview. And what is brought out in that interview done by Will Wirtz with the Executive Intelligence Review is the aura, how does he put it? The environment, of corruption that surrounds McCabe, who is now the acting head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Andrew McCabe. This is Black knows this. U.S. Senator Black knows this because, first of all, Senator Black, you know, a much decorated veteran who actually also was the head of the Army's Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, who is admitted for practice to the U.S. Supreme Court and so on. He personally has gone multiple times to Syria, has become a strong advocate of a peaceful resolution of that conflict, has praised President Assad for his defense, among others, of Christians in Syria against the jihadis, and has urged the United States, and of course is working with the Trump administration to shape a new policy, a new collaborative policy in the region. Well, for his efforts, the current FBI director, Andrew McCabe's wife, was recruited by the Governor McAuliffe of Virginia, who is, of course, one of the closest friends of the Clintons, of Hillary Clinton in particular, to run against Black for his outspoken, you can assume, outspoken breaking of the blackout, you know, on the truth about Syria, you know, within the establishment. First elected official, as far as I know, to do that. Now there's Tulsi Gabbard and others, but at the time he was the first. So not only was McAuliffe recruit Jill McCabe to run against Black, but then Jill McCabe was funded with money from outside Virginia by McAuliffe, by the Clinton apparatus, to the tune of $500,000 to $600,000, you know, all outside money. And as Black says in the interview, they've never seen anything like this. You know, I mean, the obvious intent was just to pulverize him, you know, and destroy his political career, right? It didn't work. But James McCabe, now the acting Attorney General, personally campaigned with his wife, was at the meeting with McAuliffe, with Jill McCabe, when she was recruited as a candidate, while he was an official, the #2 man at the FBI. Now this is a direct violation of law, of FBI protocol, and this is the kind of person that's well, this comes an issue because just this last week, McCabe testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee and said that his work on the investigation into the alleged Trump ties to Russia is, quote, probably the most important thing I've done in public life. Now, and the press said this was a declaration of war on McCabe's part against Trump. Now, I mean, that's the media going hyperbolic, but obviously McCabe is already off the rails himself, and is somebody that has to be removed because this cannot be tolerated. You know, in the top law enforcement official, now the top law enforcement official in the United States of America. But the fact that he was actively campaigning, photographs exist of him with, you know, Jill McCabe campaign T-shirts on at events and so on. I mean, this is a wow. So this is okay. So there's more to this. I don't know all the details. More will be printed, but we just learned. Will Wirtz, digging into this a bit more, found that McCabe, back in 2010, 2011, James McCabe was working in Andrew McCabe. I keep mixing it up with James Comey. Yeah, kind of. Was working for the FBI's Eurasian Organized Crime Unit in New York City in 2010, 2011. And who else was working in coordination with the Eurasian Organized Crime Unit in New York City at the time? Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele of MI6. I don't know if at that time he was still in MI6 or was retired from MI6 officially. But Christopher Steele, who wrote the dodgy dossier, right, who worked for the anti-Trump Republicans, then went over to work for was paid for by the Clinton campaign apparatus, and whose dodgy dossier was then provided to the FBI, and who the FBI directly sought to hire. We're trying to, Senator Grassley, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is trying to determine this, whether the FBI actually did hire, pay for, for consultation or otherwise, Christopher Steele, but it's an open question. It is known that they attempted, at least as a published reports that they were considering hiring. Well, here's McCabe, right? Number 2 man in the FBI, hiring Christopher, or working with Christopher, a long trail of working with Christopher Steele. The question then, it puts more meat on the bone, the question of whether it wasn't the fact that Andrew McCabe, then the number 2 man at the FBI, was the guy who was leaking Christopher Steele material and other material from the FBI into the media and to the Congress, because congressmen, senators and congressmen in the key committees like Intelligence Committee and so forth, were getting special briefings on the corruption of Trump, supposedly the Russian story and so forth, before the election even occurred, as part of the black operations that were going on. So what was McCabe's role in all that? It takes on even more meaning now that we know that Christopher Steele was working in the same crime unit, Eurasian organized crime unit, i.e. Russia and so on and so forth, in New York City with Christopher Steele. I think it really does come back to, the positive point here to come back to is the Belt and Road Forum has begun. The world is moving forward. Comey's out. Senator Grassley was asked about this, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and as many of you know, his response to being asked about the Comey business and whether this wasn't horrible or what was his opinion of it, and he said, "Suck it up and move on." Right? That was his answer. Suck it up and move on.
Who said that?
Senator Charles Grassley, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the nemesis of James Comey and perhaps, and also of Andrew McCabe. He's been asking the probing questions. He wasn't getting answers to his written questions from Comey, but Comey's now out, and we'll see where we go from here. But the story that Richard Black, current U.S. Senator of Virginia, Richard Black, has to tell about personally about Andrew McCabe and Joe McCabe and so forth, and how this ties in, is a very important story that everybody should know, including senators such as Cornyn, who's now being considered as one of the possible replacements as director of the FBI. So I think that's a good place to end it. We can open discussion, question and answers. Well, we can, if there's that, I don't know if there's anything pertinent to, go ahead.
Well,
Belinda?
one thing I just wanted to say, because I agree with you that interview is just extremely powerful, very important to get it out. But one thing that also came out in that interview is that at the same time Jill McCabe was recruited to run against Richard Black to knock out somebody who had already qualified on the ballot through petitioning and so on and so forth, and done totally by the higher-ups in the party around.
McAuliffe ordered that other candidate to just basically step out of the way, get out of the way.
But that McCabe, same time he got his wife to run against Black and poured the money in with the Clintons and McAuliffe and so forth, he was running an FBI, like a sting operation against Richard Black.
Right, and that's another part of the interview. Yeah,
right, because he was involved he was at that point chairing like anti-terror investigations or something in the Middle East, or I don't know what it was. But he was, they sent FBI operatives in to try to recruit Richard Black into some,
not undercover. They just directly went
into like
Black
fishy operations, which would compromise him and everything he was doing. So that's also in the interview, and again, really important for people to see. this is a real-time example of what has been going on for a long time in this country, where the FBI has not served the American people the way it's supposed to, but instead has been a political control apparatus on behalf of the British.
Very good point. Very useful. Yeah.
This guy Zhu Xi. How do you spell his name?
ZHU. And I don't have it in front of me now, but I think it's CHI.
Anyway, it's interesting that one of the things that you said was that Sun Yat-sen, in his talk about cooperation, not struggle, comes from Zhu Xi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And the reason I wanted to bring that up because Zhu Xi is back 1100, you said, right? 1100, 1200.
Right. 1130 to 1200.
And the a few weeks ago, I was substituting in the classroom, and
oh, you're right. You're right, Diane. XI. I'm just used to thinking about how to pronounce it as opposed to spell.
Anyway, I was substituting in the classroom, and one of the things that they had looked at, they weren't working on at the time, was Beowulf. And has anyone here read Beowulf? Do you remember Beowulf?
Not for 40 years.
That was in
That was one of those cult classics. If you read Siddhartha, you probably read Beowulf.
Right. Now,
So
the thing that's
It was
interesting.
actually in junior high school.
Oh, you're-
Okay, so what's his connection with?
well, it was also a cult classic, or a counterculture classic. Anyway, go ahead.
So the idea that comes to my mind, Beowulf is said to be, sort of a foundational understanding of society at that time, and that this is what was viewed as behavior of nations and behaviors of great people, right? And it's nothing but bloodthirsty killers.
Yeah, right. Like
That's all it is. It's just bloodthirsty killers, and that's from that grows the concepts of government in the West. Right now, you compare that to what Zhu Xi is saying about cooperation, not struggle. We're not animals, right? That this primary force of the nature of man is cooperation. So it's really a very interesting thing, because look at the world wars we've just had in the last century, and the brutality that we're seeing right now in the Middle East. That this is the sort of a platform of imperialism. It's the platform of British imperialism, and what the Chinese are doing is sort of resurrecting a far more ancient platform of the real nature of humanity, which is, I find so ironic, because of course China's communist.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let me say. A couple of things. One is, I think first of all, Americans have really got to step back. We've all got to step back and recognize. Look, the world. Different cultures have entirely different, language, cultures, and histories and institutions that have developed. This idea that Western democracies is something that you're going to impose on some other part of the world is completely crazy. China, it's not a question of whether it was communist. Well, how relevant it is that it was formerly colonized by the British, brutally, But also, this Chinese spirit of cooperation also speaks to something, that Xi and other leaders are now bringing forward in terms of promoting Confucianism again. In other words, communism, well, what's that? That's a word. What's developing now in China? They talk about whatever they're developing as having Chinese characteristics, whether it's capitalism with Chinese characteristics or socialism with Chinese characteristics. These overlays are kind of, peeled away, so I really think this, we really got to get past these real moralizing kinds of tones and way of thinking, and that's really why a dialogue of cultures is so important. The other thing it just reminds me of, you go back and read I'm trying to think of his name, the Brit, who wrote it's one of these standard histories of Western civilization.
Gibbons?
No, not Gibbons wrote on the Roman Empire, but it's a more recent, it's H.G. Wells, H.G. Wells wrote, it's like a 3-volume work. It's one of these things. It was mass produced and sold across the United States, back in the time. And, it's back when America had this fascination with tweed suits and people that wore tweed suits and had British accents and were, academics and so on. And so if you wanted to be intelligent, you had to read H.G. Wells' History of Western Civilization. And it's the same kind of thing. Only there it's, all history, he takes you through it. His rewrite of history. That it all began with Babylon. It all began, empires begat all of Western civilization. Western civilization was produced by these empires. Brutal, cruel, thinking of the whore of Babylon, in the Bible. I mean, this is what, this was the enemy of civilization. But, this attempt to rewrite history goes on and on. It's also what freaks out, I really beginning to appreciate this a little more. It really is what freaks the British out about the continued new discoveries in archaeology, that track human civilization back further, that, looks like maybe the first, Homo sapiens or close relatives were, here, 130,000 years ago.
In the U.S.
In the United States, right? There's the recent discovery in California, right?
Freaks them out.
I mean, because it raises the question, if we were here 130,000 years ago, what happened in between? How many ups and downs have there been to civilization? It wasn't a straight line from Babylon to the city of London, or whatever they consider the high point of civilization, right? Some nightclub in New York or something. But once you have this idea that it's been a rocky road, then the question of examining what were the principles upon which it developed, based on astronomy, navigation, and so forth, what led to its declines, what undermined civilizations, and so that's the real study of history, and they don't want the study of actual history, right? That goes back to Xu Xi as well, about studying and through that process discovering principles, fundamental principles.
And also the Peace of Westphalia.
The treaty. The Peace of Westphalia, yes, the Treaty of Westphalia. In terms of Western civilization itself. Okay, so we'll wrap it for now. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.